Rudolf Cunett decided to go to Paris to see his old friend Vladimir Smirnoff and obtain the American and Canadian rights to manufacture and sell Smirnoff Vodka in America. He did that. And with the rights obtained, of course, the so-called secret manufacturing process which Vladimir had acquired from his family in Moscow before the Russian Revolution and had brought with him to Paris, and was then making Smirnoff Vodka in Paris in 1933. So we handled Smirnoff Vodka as an agent for several years. And then in 1939, the Smirnoff Company went bankrupt. And Cunett tried hard to sell it. Finally, he came to me and offered me the business for $50,000. And I said, well, the answer is no. In the first place, it isn't worth $50,000. And in the second place, Hugh Blind doesn't have $50,000. Cunett said, well, I understand that, so I'll make you a proposition. He said, we rent our factory in Bethel, so there's no liability there. We have equipment that is depreciated at $14,000. I will sell you the business for the depreciated value of the equipment. You can move it to Hartford, Connecticut, where you have a factory anyway. And then in addition to that, I would expect to have a job with Hugh Blind of some consequence, and I need $6,000 a year to live on. And then in addition to that, he said, I would expect a small royalty to my stockholders, who this way will get nothing. And the royalty should extend for 10 years and be paid on sales an amount to 5% of the sales price less the federal tax. So I said, all right, you have a deal. And that's how, by accident, Hugh Blind got involved in making and selling Smirnoff Vodka in the United States. But in order to be an important brand in America, it had to have international sales. And so Cunett obtained from Mrs. Smirnoff, living in Nice, France, the so-called international rights. But they never appeared to me to be too valid. And so in 55 or 56, we decided to buy the Smirnoff Company of Paris, which would automatically give us world rights to Smirnoff Vodka. A man by the name of Terezareff had bought the Smirnoff Company of Paris from the estate of Vladimir Smirnoff, who died in the 30s. He was running it, and through Cunett's introduction, I told him I would like to buy his company. He said, all right, I'm willing to sell you on the following conditions. The price is $25,000. I want $1,000 a month for myself and my wife as long as we live, and I want you to rebuild the Greek Orthodox Church in Paris so that it is usable. We agreed to all three, and therefore owned the Smirnoff Company of Paris, giving us world rights on Smirnoff Vodka. Those world rights today are quite valuable because Smirnoff, outside the United States, sells some 5 million cases a year, and the royalties amount to about $1 a case. When we bought the Smirnoff Company, we had no idea as to what we were going to do with it, and we had no idea of what we were going to do with Rudolf Cunett. His job was advertising manager of Hugh Blind. And early on in '39, he came to Hartford and said, how am I going to earn the $6,000 a year you're paying me? I'm advertising manager. What does that mean? And I said, I really don't know. You just take care of the advertising, such as it is. But I'll give you a suggestion that the first thing you do is to change the Smirnoff label and package so that it says Smirnoff and not just vodka. This was done in a very intriguing way, and you can see where by putting a strip label with Smirnoff on it on the bottle changed the whole complexion of selling vodka. We weren't just selling vodka, we were selling Smirnoff vodka. If Smirnoff was to have a chance of competing with whiskey in America, it had to be as a mixer. And therefore, I went to California with Rudolph Cunett, and through him met a fellow by the name of Jack Morgan. Jack Morgan owned the Cock and Bull restaurant in Los Angeles. So he had Cock and Bull ginger beer made for him in Los Angeles, and of course couldn't sell it because Americans didn't like ginger beer, they liked ginger ale. Morgan had a girlfriend, a great, big, beautiful, buxom woman by the name of Oseline Schmidt, who had inherited a copper factory from her father, but unfortunately hadn't found any sale for its products. And so with Cunett, one evening, Morgan, Oseline Schmidt, and I met at the bar of the Cock and Bull restaurant and tried to think up a drink for Smirnoff vodka with ginger beer. We finally came up with the name Moscow Mule. Just how it originated, I don't know. But I imagine that it had to do with a kick.
May I have a Moscow Mule, please?
So the Moscow Mule eventually developed to be a 2-ounce drink of Smirnoff vodka put in a copper mug made by Oseline, then mixed with ginger beer from Morgan's Cock and Bull ginger beer bottle, and a squeeze of lime. We developed the Moscow Mule in 1940, and then let it go because World War II came in and no Smirnoff was made. In 46 or thereabouts, we started again and franchised Cock and Bull ginger beer and promoted the Moscow Mule. The big difficulty, of course, was to get a bartender to even try it. He'd say, "What, drink that stuff? Russian dynamite and drop dead?" No, sir. So I developed a scheme to get him to try it. Polaroid had just come out with a camera that took a picture immediately. I bought one, and I'd go into a bar with a Moscow Mule mug, a bottle of Smirnoff, a bottle of Cock and Bull ginger beer, and offer to make the bartender for free a drink if he would just try it. And I said, "You know, if you will try it, I will give you a picture of your doing it, which you can immediately take home to your wife." He said, "How are you going to do that?" And I said, "Well, that's my business. Just try this drink and I'll show you." So he would reluctantly sip a little Moscow Mule, and he said, "Tastes pretty good." And I would snap a Polaroid picture of him. In fact, I'd snap 2. One for him to take home to his wife, and one I would use in the bar across the street. It worked wonders, and of course the press got onto it, and it received tremendous publicity at that time. And no doubt was the key influence in making the Moscow Mule famous throughout America. The Moscow Mule, of course, was the first mixing drink originated by Smirnoff. Then followed many others. The Screwdriver, which is orange juice and Smirnoff vodka. The Bloody Mary, which George Jessel lays claim to having founded, but actually was started in England many years ago and was made with gin, tomato juice, Worcester sauce. Then followed the Bullshot, the Gimlet, and many other mixed drinks. And it was the mixability of Smirnoff that by accident again made it famous. There's an old saying in the whiskey business that the more expensive whiskey gets, the better it tastes. Whether that was the case in Smirnoff vodka, I don't know. But I do know that the pricing of Smirnoff vodka has, of course, been a very important part of its success. It was in 1939, the sales manager, Kelsey Lingo, approached me about raising a few people's salaries. The raises amounted to $12,000 a year. And I said, well, where are you going to get the money? And of course he didn't know. We weren't making any money in those days. So I said, well, I have an idea for you. You've just got a new product, Smirnoff Vodka, selling 6,000 cases a year. If you raise the price $2 a case, you will have $12,000. He said, oh, you couldn't do that, nobody'd buy it. I said, they're not buying it anyway. They're only selling 6,000 cases a year. The price was raised. Therefore, raising the price of Smirnoff about 50 cents a bottle over Gordon's gin. With this increase in price, sales started to grow, and they grew in tremendous proportions. And the Smirnoff Company learned that by raising the price, it could keep doing so modestly from year to year, and has done so since. We knew that advertising was terribly important. Cunett had started with just using Russian crowns and that kind of thing, and it really didn't make an impression. Milton Goodman of the Gumbiner Agency had the idea of advertising liquor on quite a different basis. And he came up with the original ad of the driest of the dry, which was a Smirnoff martini taken in the desert. That ad became world famous, and then brought up a very important point to Heublein, that advertising was really the name of the game, and the Smirnoff Vodka advertising grew from year to year and became quite famous, always concentrating on mixed drinks, because that was the theme, started by the Moscow Mule. Many years ago, after we had introduced Relska vodka to compete with Smirnoff, Heublein makes a number of vodkas. A newspaper reporter, a young lady, asked me, Mr. Martin, what is the difference between Smirnoff and Relska? And I said facetiously, oh, about $6 million. She said, Mr. Martin, you don't really mean that, do you? And I said, no, of course I don't. The money spent on advertising is terribly important.
I used to take them home to Mummy until I discovered Smirnoff.
But the real thing that makes the difference, makes Smirnoff the largest selling brand of liquor in the world, is the quality of the product itself.
Smirnoff Vodka, from Russia to America. Just as it had been a household name in Imperial Russia, it has now become a household name in America and the world over. The production process, though considerably modernized, the formula remains the same today and carries its mark of excellence in an unbroken link with the past.
Like everything else to do with Smirnoff, as far as Heublein's concerned, is a matter of luck. Yes, the whole thing, the buying of the business, the invention of the Moscow Mule, was all luck, or hunch, or whatever you want to call it. We owe it entirely to good fortune, not to any great genius.